Tonight, the woman that Julia Roberts played on the big screen. Erin Brockovich tells us how to beat big power. What is the right way to remember the Bali bombings and women fighting for their rights in Iran? Welcome to Q&A. Thank you for that welcome. I'm Stan Grant. Also tonight, the rise of fake news and conspiracy theories, but is truth starting to prevail? Well, here to give you some answers, Deputy Leader of the Nationals, Perin Davey, Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, Stephen Jones, Advisor at the Centre for Public Christianity, Tim Costello, Iranian-born journalist and scholar Saba Vasefi, and in Melbourne, the woman whose life story has been immortalised on screen, Erin Brockovich. Please make them all feel welcome. As you know, you can live stream us around the country on iView, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Quanda is the hashtag. Get involved. And to get us started tonight, here's a question from Jan Kimavek.
Hi, Erin. My question is to you. Was Julia Roberts' portrayal of you in the movie fairly accurate? What was and what wasn't?
She did a fantastic job. From my perspective, she certainly nailed it. From just her mannerisms, her outfits, her shoes, being that single mom, and kind of the attitude that she had certainly was very accurate. So I couldn't be more proud of her performance.
Erin, I heard a little whisper, though, that there was someone else that you had in mind for that role. Is that right? You had a first choice and it wasn't Julia Roberts?
Well, for me, people would ask, who do you think should play you? I really never thought anything like this would happen. And I thought maybe somebody like Goldie Hawn, because she's fun. And I can actually be fun, and nobody seems to know that. So that was my first choice.
Would Goldie Hawn have been good, do you think? Yeah? Julia Roberts was better?
I think Julia Roberts was good.
She? Did you like performance,
Goldie
Dan?
Hawn, but I think Julia Roberts was good.
Julia Roberts did great.
Perin, you've done some acting. Is that right?
Oh, nothing like what Julia Roberts does. I have done the blink and you miss me acting.
Oh, okay.
I've done amateur stage, but some extra work for television and film. Never got discovered. I tried. I never got discovered. So here I am.
In politics.
Instead.
Who would play you, Tim, in a movie?
Well, with a physique like this, obviously Hugh Jackman. So, not many of us, have bodies like this, Stan. You hadn't noticed.
No, it missed me. Stephen.
I'd like to imagine that maybe George Clooney, but in reality it's probably more like Jim Carrey.
It did, Erin, though, in all seriousness. I mean, you were well known, you'd certainly known for your work, but that must have put it into the stratosphere.
It really did. It became a platform that just really opened the conversation up. And, something else was going on in that film that I observed when I went to the movie theaters by myself and nobody knew who I was when they were leaving. And what it touched upon was, wow, you don't really have to be like who you think you're supposed to be to speak up. Wow, you could be a single mom and you could speak up. And wow, is that really going on? So it created a lot of awareness around not only the environment, but that the everyday person can rise up and speak up and can fight to make a change. And that was a really deep message in there that I picked up on from the audiences when I started showing up to the movie theaters and watching Erin Brockovich.
Yeah, and that leads us, in fact, to our next question from Hayley Dobbin. Hayley?
How do we ensure protests are effective in creating actual change, including legislation reform? And are there circumstances in which individual activism is better than communal protests?
I'll go back to you, Erin, on that. You were someone who took a stand, but there were people there with you as well. What's the role of the individual and what's the role of the community?
Well, the role of the individual is to find their own courage to speak up and to speak out, to be that first front leader, if you will. And I think it's really learning and understanding about yourself, that we have these intrepidations or this fear that if I step up or speak out, somebody will make fun of me, and we kind of recoil. Don't ever do that. When you're in that community and you're living it and experiencing it, find your courage to be that first person to step out. And then the most important thing you can do after that is join the community. It becomes a movement when you do. I learned in Hinckley, I could speak up as an individual, and it didn't have the same impact as until I brought in that community where we became 1 + 1, and then we became 10 and 50 and 100 and 200 and 300. Once we became solid as a community, the collective, that voice got that much stronger, and we had that much more strength to be seen and to be heard.
But where do you find that courage, Erin? Because I remember back to the movie, and of course there are people telling you that you can't do this. Look at the impact it's going to have on your family. You're a single mother. Where do you find that courage in the face of other people who are telling you that maybe not?
Because I was there and I saw it, and seeing is believing. And I think oftentimes we hear of stories, but when we're not there and we don't see it, therefore we think it isn't real. I saw the two-headed frogs. I saw the green water. I saw animals covered in their tumors. I saw people suffering. And everybody would told me, you're not a doctor, you're not a lawyer, you're not a scientist. Why should we listen to you? Why are you even doing this? And I was really kind of struck with that comment. I'm like, I don't have to be any of that to be a human and to tell you what I see and what they're experiencing is in fact wrong. And I wasn't going to take the position, why not me? It was why can't it be me? And so I just wasn't going to let anyone else try to convince me that what I saw and what they were experiencing was in fact unreal, and that you had to be something to speak up. Nothing could be further from the truth. Be you, and when you see that kind of suffering, speak up.
Saba? What do you take, Saba, from what you just heard from Erin?
I endorse it, and I think history of resistance is an orchard of hope. And I remember my mother advised, she told me, never, ever don't anyone take your inner power away from you. And this is what helped me within my life in Australia during my life. You know, I exposed to so many discouragers, excluders, doubters. And during that process, always I try to embrace my inner power. And it is interesting because I learned to read English and write in English when I came to Australia.
Because you came from Iran, of course.
Yes, from Iran. I came from Iran. And the first article I read in English was Power of Powerless. And it changed whole of my perception. And during my journalistic work, there was so many shocking incident. You know, people see media writing about refugees. People see me, my work has been published, but no one knows what is going on behind the scene. You know, how I have been treated. And the only things could, keep me alive, to keep continue, was that kind of imagination and idea of powerless and how it looked like to resist in the margin and push everything to the background. And it is my perception about
because what you're talking about is going to lead to our next discussion. But before I do, I want to learn a little bit more about your own experience of what led you here and what your family had to go through to come to Australia from Iran.
Yeah. I was teaching in the university, and I was working with women and children on death row. And I was working as a art therapy project director. And because of all the advocacy I was doing, I was persecuted. And I fled to Turkey. And when I arrived in a complicated way, arrived to Turkey, and my parents brought my daughter to Turkey, and from Turkey I came to Australia. But I cannot talk about my family because constantly they are under pressure because of me and my brother in the West. Yeah.
Well, let's get more on this, and we're going to hear a lot more about this issue. Let's go now to Arezu Naramani. Arezu?
Yeah, correct. Hi. Hi.
Hi. Your question?
Actually, my question is to all the members of the panel. Given the extreme situation in Iran, inhuman brutality by the regime, and breach of human rights and humanity in every level, many Western countries, including UK, Canada, and America, announced travel bans and asset freeze on brutal regime associates. I'm just wondering, I'd like to ask, what is the strong actions that Australian government and other countries can provide to support Iranian people and stop the bloodshed in Iran?
Stephen.
First, I want to say thank you, and to you and your countrymen, your brothers and sisters back in Iran. They have our strength and support, and I can't imagine how difficult it is for you to be here in Australia, seeing what's going on back home and having family involved. You deserve our solidarity and support, and you have that. We condemn the actions. I think it's important for a country like Australia to be acting multilaterally with all the countries around the world who share our values, and expressing to Iran in the strongest of terms that we abhor what is going on, and working through the multilateral fora to work at what other pressure can be placed upon the leadership and the government in Iran to recognise and treat the women in particular in Iran with the dignity and respect that they deserve. I think it's important, though, for a government like Australia, for a country like Australia, that we're working multilaterally with all of the other countries which share our values.
Perin?
Yeah, look, I do agree with Stephen in this case. It's terrible what is going on over there. And one thing we also must make sure that when we make any decisions about how we respond and react is that we don't inadvertently make decisions that have a negative impact on the innocent civilians. And we don't want to make the lives worse for any of the women in Iran. So we don't want to necessarily arbitrarily ban travel or put sanctions on that will make it impossible for those people to maybe get out and get to safety. So I agree, we've got to do it through diplomatic channels first and foremost, but also completely condone what the government has done in speaking up against what is happening over there.
Is that the answer you want, Arezu, or do you want to see more? Is there more?
I want to see more, specific actions. What's exactly the government of Australia is just, if they have made any decision, if they consider what's the solution, what we can do, because we don't want they just take the national assets. They are, those are assets of people. They belongs to the people, and they just invest in Western country, and they just made a, safe haven, for themselves in here.
So you would like to see bans on these assets?
Of course.
And
yeah.
real economic sanctions against Iran. Stephen, why not?
I think there's a whole range of things that we consider as we see the situation unfold in Iran. There has been some suggestion that we should withdraw our diplomatic representations in the country and impose travel bans. I think now in particular, it is important that we have people in country who are able to provide us with reliable information about what's going on there. So, and our embassy and our diplomatic staff are an important source of that unbiased information. So for that reason, I don't support at this stage us withdrawing our staff. And for the same reason, we want Western journalists to be able to travel to Iran to be able to report honestly with what's going on there as well.
Tim, is that enough from where you sit, or do you think that there is more pressure that Australia can bring to bear specifically?
Well, now we've signed the Maginski Act. Targeted sanctions should be happening straight away. I think we should certainly be looking at economic sanctions. That may not scare Iran, but actually with others, if that happens, I think there is this ripple effect, because with women risking their lives, including Saba's mother, in protests, I think that's our fundamental commitment now. And I would say, having been to Manus Island and seen Iranians who were in detention, who could never go back, languishing purposelessly and suffering at the hands of our government, I think this must never happen again, and we must be empathetic for anyone fleeing from this sort of persecution.
Reza, you spent time in detention, didn't you? And
Yes.
Christmas Island, what was that like for you?
It wasn't good experience, obviously. I spent 2 years of my life in detention center in Christmas Island with my 1-year-old son, being detained for really not good reason. We came to Australia as, asylum seeker to live free life in here. I was hoping if I didn't have much right as a woman in my country, I can come to one of the Western country and I can be considered as a human. But unfortunately, what we experience in here, and still we are experiencing, it's now 10 years we are in Australia, we are still living in limbo. We have no right to study, we have no right to travel, we have no right to buy any assets in Australia, and I have 2 Australian-born children, they still doesn't have any nationality. And these are, I think, these are something nobody wants to experience in his or her life.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that. And Sarah Bakshi is here as well. Sarah? Yeah, you share a similar situation to Arezu, don't you, in your experience in coming to Australia?
Yes, I came here on student visa, but I've had so many similar experiences as the women in Iran. They are what they're taking now. I've been in their place. Can I just stand up for a second?
Yes, you can.
So I just want people to see where I look now. I can get killed for where I look in my country. I don't think there is anything wrong in my appearance.
In not wearing
Yeah.
a headscarf.
Yeah. So I've had so many bad experiences. I have been in police custody a few times for the reasons that I think that's definitely not crime. The first time I was in police custody, I was 12. It was when I was in my cousin's car, going to a supermarket for essential shopping, and he's older than me, so he was driving me there. And he was a boy, of course, so the morality police pulled over the car and they asked us question, what's the relation between me and my cousin? And because we said we are cousin and we don't have any marriage certificate, because obviously in Iran, girls and boys, they cannot be out on the street if they're not married officially with a marriage certificate. So they took me to police custody. They kicked me. I'm sorry, I'm not here to cry because I want to share my experience so people can hear me. So that was the first experience I had. There was a lot of process for me to be able to come out. So my parents came and they explained the situation. They said we've got the permission for her to be out on the street with his cousin. So they kicked my dad out. They said you're not allowed to have your girl on the street with her cousin because this is against Islamic rule. So anyway, that was the first time. Second time, third time, I've been kicked out because I had nail polish on my toes and I had tongue walking on the street. I was kicked out of uni class because I had my scarves back and my hair was out, so I wasn't be able to study for a term, like for a semester in my uni back home. So last time I left country was 2016 when I was coming out of the airport, like police custody check. They asked me different questions. They asked me like, where do I go and why do I go and why did I come? So this sort of questions. And I told them that I'm a student, I'm going back to study. They asked me like a lot of personal questions. Where do I live in Australia? And if I do have a boyfriend and if I'm around with any boys.
Even those personal questions?
Yes. Yes. So when I stopped answering, I said they're too personal. I don't understand why you are asking me these questions. And they took my passport. They said, you need to answer the questions if you don't want to miss your flight. So I keep answering, and they keep asking me a lot of things, like what do I involved in Australia, if I'm doing anything against Islamic Republic of Iran. So when I started answering, the question was getting more and more. So I could hear the speakers, they calling my name because I was missing my flight. And they started laughing. They said, you need to sign 12 paper of commitment that you're not committing any crime against Islamic regime if you don't want to miss your flight. So they took me to a freaking dark room, it was really scary. So they asked me a lot of questions, with a lot of lights. I don't know, I'm asking a lot of friends, and they haven't experienced this in the airport. So maybe I'm one of the many that I experienced in the airport. So I had to fingerprint all those 12 papers and sign the papers that I'm not doing anything against Islamic Republic of Iran. And then when I was going through the passport check, they gave my passport in the last minute, but the flight was already given my suitcase back. So when I went through second, because there is few police custody check in airport, when I was going through the second one, they wanted to check my body if I've got anything in my body, because they are already doubting me in the first police custody. I had no problem. I had no political background. I had no history. I don't know what was happening. So that was the last experience I had. It was, I rather not explain the end. It wasn't really nice, but I missed my flight. I missed my flight, yeah.
And I'll come back to Saba on this. We've been listening to these stories, and I'm so sorry to hear what happened to you and what we see happening in Iran right now. And you listen to the response that we've had from politicians tonight. Is it enough?
No. No. For a long time, since Islamic Republic seized the power, they are taking hostage. And the West is capitulating to the terrorist demands. And, my request from the West, and especially Australian government, is to delegitimize Islamic Republic as a legitimate government, disparage them, reduce them to a terrorist group, not... I give you some evidences. For example, it is the latest news, it's very current. Asadullah Assadi in Belgium court, he was sentenced to 20 years jail for plotting to bomb opposition rally in Paris. Hamid Nouri in Swedish court was sentenced to life in jail for leading execution of the political prisoner in 1988, I think. They are all diplomats. Asadullah Assadi was a diplomat in Europe, Iranian diplomat, and Hamid Nouri was ex-Iranian official. For the sake of national security, for the sake of safety and security of people, I am advising you, I am telling you, I don't know who is advising this government about Iran. Whatever you are hearing probably is not accurate. That I think Australian government is so relaxed. We are not hearing from Prime Minister at all. Just I'm happy to provide, massive amount of visual evidences, textual evidences. You see, they are real terrorists. They are friend of Al-Qaeda. One of the Al-Qaeda's leader was living in Iran. They are friend of Hezbollah, Lebanon Hezbollah. They are friend of Taliban. Yeah, just remind me. Whoever is involved with terrorism, they are defending them.
So, Stephen, a direct response, not to me, but to Saba.
And imagine thousands of people were protesting in Sydney and other cities, and there is a potential risk. Iranian government demonstrated they are murderer. They have no mercy to kill children. You know, they use whatever they can to hold their power. They killed their children. They executed all the opposition and dissidents. And if something happened, the West cannot say, oh, it is a shocking incident, because they have historical terrorist attacks.
Let's hear from Stephen.
Couple of things. Firstly, thank you, and again, I'm very sorry to hear what's happening to you and your countrymen and your family. Been in government 3 months, and we are working through all of these backlogs of issues, whether it's in international relations issues or locally.
You know how many more people should be killed until the West come to the conclusion that all the Iranian diplomats must be deported and disparaged.
Yep. We have to go through the... We have to ensure that any steps that we take in these areas, they're big steps for us to take as a country. We've got to do it in a way that is methodical, and a way that looks at all the evidence and looks at all the consequences of this.
What are the methods?
So these are things that we have to look at. We're not going to rush into it and ensure that when we take steps such as the ones that you're suggesting...
How long does it take to take the steps?
Well, this is not my portfolio. This is other members of the government who will look at this, and I know they are looking at this, but... We need to ensure that when we take these steps, and I'm not disagreeing with any of your
it is the way of
propositions.
My talking,
yes,
I'm using my hands a lot.
Well,
and
no, you're very, very passionate about it. But Stephen, one thing you can do, Arezu is sitting here now, and she spoke about being in detention. She spoke about being in limbo. She spoke about her child not having a home in the world and not being able to go back to Iran. Can you look at her now and say that you are going to take up Arezu's case?
10 years I'm waiting to be able to do my PhD in Australia.
Yeah. Are you going to take up that case?
I was at my
personally?
30, now I'm 40. I am still waiting to do my PhD in Australia, and hopefully one day I can do that.
I'm not sure...
Can I interrupt you before you respond? Sorry. I think
I'm sure you can and will.
Senator Penny Wong, in a beautiful statement, she said, in the last paragraph of her tweet, in the Twitter, she said, which is so good, I am so thankful to her, to express her solidarity, but we need her and the government back up this claim with their support. In the last sentence, she said, Australia is going to continue support women and girls of Iran, and she's one of them.
And you can be assured that the Australian government will act in accordance with the values. I will get to that. I will get to that. I just want to respond here. You can be assured that the Australian government will act in accordance with the values that have been expressed by Penny, as we have in other places around the world. We'll seek to do it through our multilateral fora that is working in combination with other countries around the world, so that we are not just working one out, but working in combination with other countries around the world, so that whatever we do has the most powerful and forceful effect. Now, to your question, I'm not exactly sure about what type of visa you're on. I suspect
temporary visa, but
temporary
many
visa
of the people like me, like she, her visa is expired. She's quite sick.
Yes.
And she doesn't even have Medicare. And I am one of the best, actually. But I know lots of people, refugees, people in Australia. All of them, they are suffering in this country. And we are still feeling we are detainee in a bigger island.
Is that something that you can commit to tonight, to take this back and Australia to expedite support?
We are looking very closely at the people who are here on temporary protection visas. We've been in government for 3 months, so looking at all of the people here on temporary protection visas, you've basically had a sword hanging over your head for far too long. In your case, 10 years. We want to see how we can regularise the arrangements so that you can participate fully in Australian society, and you have no doubt
Is there any time frame?
a lot to offer. Well, I can't answer the specifics of your case on national television tonight. It sits outside my portfolio, but I know that we are committed to ensuring that we can regularise the situation on people on temporary protection visas so that you aren't living in limbo.
Can I just bring, before we move on, and of course this is something obviously we'll come back to at some future programs as well, but Erin Brockovich, the United States cut a deal with Iran, a nuclear deal. It then retracted that deal and negotiations underway potentially to revive that. Iranians have looked to the United States in the past for support during protests, and that hasn't been forthcoming, and they felt abandoned. What more can the United States do?
I would be on this program for the next week if I even tried to comprehend some of our political decisions that get made in the United States and why we make the decisions that we do. And what I would want to share here is to the audience members that have spoken up about the issues in Iran, and for all women in Iran who are finding the courage to speak up. And what I hope that we can do at a political level is listen, not to respond, but listen to understand. And whether it be the United States or Australia or any country in the world, our leaders need to work collectively together to create a solid front and send a message from the world leaders that this type of humanitarian injustice we will not stand for.
Arezou, good luck. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story with us as well. We'll move on. Here's Lily O'Loughlin.
This week marks 20 years on from the tragic Bali bombings. The event has been covered extensively in the media, and there is now a television show depicting it. How should the media respectfully represent political and social events that have caused significant trauma and pain?
Tim Costello, there's been a sort of criticism about the way this was commemorated in Indonesia, showing images of the perpetrators. How should we handle something like this?
Yes, those images made me feel very uncomfortable, and being Australian, knowing the grief, ongoing trauma and grief of people who either were there, lost people, and loved ones who were there, made me feel very uncomfortable. However, we have to recognise that it happened in Indonesia. Their culture is their decision, and what they represent is their decision, and I think we should be respectfully explaining why that causes grief and re-traumatises without it being judgmental and telling them what to do. I think one of the things that has come out of that terrible tragedy, which I wish never happened, was remarkable cooperation between the Indonesian police and the Australian Federal Police. Up until then, we wrote defence papers for fear of Indonesia, the biggest Muslim nation on earth, just an hour from our shores. Imagine, Erin, if America had the biggest Muslim nation an hour from their shores. It absolutely obsessed us. The AFP and working with the Indonesian police was extraordinary. Then followed up by the tsunami, where John Howard gave the biggest grant of aid in our history, $1 billion to Indonesia. Completely changed the relationship. Now, this is unfortunate how they've portrayed it. It upsets me. I think we still have to remember, however, there has been some things that have made us friends coming out of this.
Perin, there have been suggestions that the bomb maker, whose sentence has been reduced, could in fact be released soon. What would you say to that, and what would you like the Australian government to do in response to that? What can they do?
And I do note that the Prime Minister has made comment about how that reduction in sentence can re-traumatise or has re-traumatised people. For the victims of the bombing, the families that lost loved ones and those that were injured post the bombing, I can imagine just hearing that news would be absolutely devastating. But we also do need to consider are we a society that believes in rehabilitation? Now, some people might say that sounds callous, but by all accounts, when you look at the news reports from Indonesia, the prison officials believe he is a model prisoner. They believe he's been rehabilitated. I believe in rehabilitation, so I really, really hope.
It sounds as if you're saying that you would support him to be released.
I would rather he didn't get released, but I'm also very cognisant of the fact that we are a society that believes in rehabilitation. We take punitive measures, but we also hope that through those punitive measures people reform. And I think I would be doing an injustice if I said we've got to pick and choose when that applies.
And to those who lost loved ones, those who were affected by it as well, our thoughts are with you. And thank you so much, Lily, for that question. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A Live. We're with Perin Davey, Stephen Jones, Tim Costello, Saba Vasefi and Erin Brockovich. Still to come, is gambling advertising wrecking families? We're going to get to that question a bit later. Let's get to a question now on the ongoing flood crisis. And we've seen more towns affected today, particularly in Victoria. Here's Mohammed Saad.
My question is, with climate change and increased risk of more rainfalls and major flooding in coming years, how current and future government need to plan for such events in budgeting and rapid response?
Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. Climate change and severe weather events are no longer something that's happening in the future. They're right now. It's happening. Climate change is upon us, which is why a couple of things that we're doing, and more to say in the context of the budget in a few weeks' time, but what we've already announced and what we're already well underway is ensuring that we are putting Commonwealth money into resilience and ensuring that we're building infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of severe weather events, that we are working together with state and local governments to ensure that if we know that building a house in a particular place is going to put the residents of that place at risk because you're building in a floodplain or you're building in a dangerous area, then we should stop doing it. And we also know that we've got to change our building standards to ensure that they are fit for the future as well. So instead of putting all of our eggs in the basket of repairing the damage after it's done, a lot more effort has got to go into ensuring that our communities, our buildings and our infrastructure is a lot more resilient in the first place. We'll be spending $200 million a year minimum on firming up our infrastructure and building resilience. That's a start. A lot more needs to be done as well.
Are we going to see something in the budget further on assisting with insurance premiums for those people who are most directly affected and seeing those premiums going up? I know there's been some work done on that already, but
yeah, so in North Queensland there's a cyclone reinsurance pool which operates to essentially attempt to reduce in some respects the premiums. It was set up by the former government. In my view, it was oversold because the reduction in premiums will be nowhere near what they were promised. That said, I actually don't think subsidising premiums, insurance premiums, is the right way to go, because insurance premium is essentially the price of covering the risk, the price of rebuilding something after it's been damaged. It is far more effective, we say, let's look at ensuring that we can reduce the risk and ensure that the buildings are built better, the infrastructure is built better, and we're not building stuff in the way of hazards in the first place. A much better and sustainable approach.
Perin?
This is a very important question, and certainly as we go on, as Stephen said, the government has changed the parameters around what we had as the Emergency Response Fund to make sure that $200 million a year is spent on mitigation, but they haven't yet defined what mitigation is, and we need to ensure that it is meaningful and legitimate mitigation.
The criticism was that you didn't use the Emergency Response Fund, that money was made on it as part of the investment, but you never used it.
No, we did draw down on it. We didn't draw down every bit because we had rules around it, being that $50 million a year would be spent on mitigation and $150 million was spent on response and recovery. Now, when we needed response and recovery money, we drew down on that straight away and we put that $75 million each for Queensland and New South Wales, plus we committed $150 million for the Northern Rivers flood response when the CSIRO review comes out. I commend the current government because they have agreed to honour those commitments, which will make a difference for the people of Lismore. But we need to also really think about, we can't just talk about mitigation and go, that's okay. We need to be meaningful about it. And sometimes mitigation is going to require things like dry storage dams. Or it will require things like maybe considering raising dam walls like Warragamba, like Wyangala Dam, because Forbes is now being flooded again. So we need to have those honest discussions with people about where they are willing to draw the line between, protecting our pristine environment, or maybe we're going to have to do these mitigation works.
I get the most honest conversation we can have is to tell people, if we build a house in exactly the same place that has flooded 4 times in the last 3 years, guess what's going to happen?
Well, when Shane Stone said that, who was the National Recovery and Resilience Commissioner, Murray Watt, who is now the Minister for Emergency Management, said he needed to be sacked.
I get the sense. I get the sense Erin Brockovich is watching all this, and I can see you shaking your head, and you're not convinced by much of it at all.
I'm actually trying to keep my composure.
I can tell.
Okay, so this didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like we weren't warned. We ignored the message. We ignored what we've seen coming. And we didn't put a plan in place, and we weren't prepared.
Yep.
And I've been saying for 10 years almost, climate change is something people don't always understand because they can't see it. And climate change will be water events, and it's happening.
Yep.
Too much water, too little water, none at all. We can't afford anymore to do this. This side did this, that side didn't do that, woulda, coulda, shoulda. What we have to do now is face and be accountable for the fact we weren't prepared. We kicked the can down the line. We haven't been dealing with our infrastructures. But moving forward, we have to change our systems, our infrastructures, our policy, and pay attention to the environmental issues that are afflicting this entire planet.
Tim Costello, it's often been said that there was a lost decade in Australia where climate was mired in culture war. Is that how you see this?
Absolutely, and I think it's been our greatest public policy failure. I think we have failed not just ourselves but next generations. With 4 grandchildren, I really worry profoundly about this. I think that we now really have to redeem ourselves by saying never again, and we're moving forward. And the equivocations, if they come, and I think Stephen pointed out, I'm the patron for the Lismore Soup Kitchen. I'll be up there next weekend reopening it. Feeds 200 people a day, houses homeless people underwater. And talking to my friends there who work there, the leadership that's needed is bottom-up, consensual leadership to say, are we going to rebuild Lismore where it is? There are some saying it's going to happen again. There are others going, but this is our whole lives. I often hear a failure really of leadership to step in and say, here's the process of grief, trauma, and now how we rebuild, because people who have been traumatised, many still in caravans, absolutely need that leadership.
I think that's a really important point that Tim has made. And there are great leaders on the ground in Lismore. I've met with them. And they understand that they can't keep doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. We need to get an alignment at the local level, the state level and nationally as well.
I think Erin's got more to say as well.
Oh, I always have something to say. Sorry.
That's why you're here.
During COVID, I released my book called Superman's Not Coming, about our water crisis. And here's the most important message, is what we, the people, can do about it. And what I want to say to we, the people, is we, too, need to plan and prepare. And we can't afford to be comfortable or complacent or take it for granted or just assume that those leaders or those powers to be are going to come in and step up and fix it. We have to be a part of planning and preparing. And if you do that at your very personal level, in your own home, with your own family, and in your community, when these disasters strike, you will be better prepared for a disaster and having a plan. And do not take it for granted that some government or leadership, in fact, is going to do it for you. We have to start helping ourselves, and we have to start acting at an individual level.
Move on to a different topic now. We'll hear from Peter Mays. Peter?
I am a born-again Christian. I love gay people. I love transgender. I love everyone. Am I likely to lose my job? Or more importantly, am I likely to be asked to leave my church?
Tim?
Well, there certainly has been a wind-up that happened by the Murdoch Press Herald-Sun in Melbourne that has led to...
After the Essendon case, of course, where the CEO had to step down or chose his church over remaining in his job.
So the Herald-Sun ran the story of the pastor's sermon 13 years ago, bits of which he's apologised for and which I don't think was a good sermon. Pointed out that Andrew Thorburn, just appointed CEO, was a member of that church. He was a chair on the parish council of the church. And the AFL and everyone said, right decision, diversity, inclusion. Then the Herald-Sun went and said to the church leaders, you can't now, with people of faith, you know, be sure of a job. And the front page of the Herald-Sun then was Holy War. Dan Andrews, a Catholic, against his own Catholic Archbishop. Dan working out that 20% of voters in the election in 4 weeks' time are Catholic. So he said, oh, I take my faith very seriously and every day it guides what I do. What's sad to me about that was the wind-up that happened meant that the social media posse all jumped. Instead of pushing the pause button, particularly the culture warriors on both sides, most of us are just in the exhausted middle. Most of us are just saying, hang on, it's a bit more complex, take time, think this out. Now, to your question, I believe God loves diversity. He sure made a lot of it. I believe that homophobia is a sin, but I also totally understand that whether it's Christian or religious Jew or Muslim scriptures, absolutely the belief of how we flourish is that sexuality flourishes best within a marriage between a man and woman. And I think Andrew Thorburn can hold those views and still do the job at Essendon. I think it was a rush to judgment.
That's the issue, though. When those views clash, and Essendon holds different views to the church that Andrew Thorburn leads. Peter, do you fear that you'd be made to make these choices? Is that what you're saying?
I'm afraid that those choices might be made for me in my job, that if somebody finds out that the church that I'm at, did some things in a sermon, say 8 years ago, and then I get tarred with the same brush in the same way.
Saba, can I bring you in here? Because we were talking before about Iran. Sarah stood up and she said she could be killed for the way that she looks because she is violating an instruction from a theocracy in Iran. In Australia, how do we decide where that line is between religious freedom and expression of that and the rights of others to be free from the expression of religious freedom?
Yeah, as a person who grew up under religious dictatorship, my mind, my bed, my life, my choice has been seized by another person. It has been considered another person's entitlement. I would support any individual person's choice, but as an individual belief, it becomes problematic when they have the power to gather together to make a group, or as a, just impose as a law. The personal belief can be expanded and become law.
Erin Brockovich, you have a Bill of Rights in the United States. Is it sufficient to mediate these types of disputes? Because, of course, you live in a country, we are, where there's separation between church and state, a secular society, but also a very religious society as well. So how does a Bill of Rights work in mediating these things?
Well, I had an interesting situation happen in Australia a few years ago where there was an environmental injustice. There was something happening, and I was watching people who were standing there watching, and I'm thinking to myself, why are you not saying something or doing anything? And the response back was, well, we don't have a Bill of Rights. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, maybe you want to get busy doing that. So my response would be that I think a Bill of Rights is...
I disagree.
Yeah, pardon me?
A hard disagree. And, sorry, I'll let you finish. Oh, yeah.
No, that's really kind of, it was that moment that happened for me when we were talking about the Bill of Rights in Australia that I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't have a Bill of Rights.
Why don't we, Stephen? And why do you disagree?
Because a Bill of Rights, if you look at the history of Bills of Rights around the world, they enshrine the things that a country is obsessed about at the point in time when the Bill of Rights is constructed. So in the United States, for example, they just fought a war of independence against the British. The right to bear arms was considered at that point in time to be absolutely essential to the citizenship rights. I'm sure if we fast forwarded 200 years and looked at the state of gun ownership in the United States today, we wouldn't think that was the thing that we wanted to enshrine in our Constitution. And in Australia today, I think we could make the same sorts of observations. They're about what you're obsessed with. I actually think democracy and Parliament should be the place where we are making these sorts of decisions. If I could just make one point up there, I actually don't think you should be in fear for your job, sir, because of your religious beliefs, and I don't think somebody should be in fear of their job because of their sexuality or their sexual orientation either. I don't want to live in a country where that happens.
Perin, where do you sit on this issue of a Bill of Rights? Would it impede the sovereignty of the Parliament to make laws?
Yeah, I actually in fierce agreement with Stephen on that point, because I think we have inherent freedoms in Australia, and we've got certain of those are included in the Constitution, and Section 116 covers the freedom of religion to some extent. It's been considered variously over the years through high courts. But the one thing that we all think we shouldn't need anti-discrimination acts. We should not need an act that bans discrimination based on sexuality, gender, race, or age. And we do. And we shouldn't need an act to allow freedom of religious expression. And yet what we are finding is it's likely that we actually do. But as Stephen said, something drafted by Parliament that can be amended over time, fit for purpose. We did try to bring it in. It didn't pass for many reasons. At the time, the Labor Party said that if they were elected, they would deal with it. So I hope they do, and I look forward to reading the legislation that they bring forward.
Tim, I know where you stand on a Bill of Rights. You're supportive, but the next question is also directed to you, so we'll move on. Renata Hand.
Yes, my question to you, Tim. Do you or would you get any bilateral support to shut down the current scourge of online betting and the waste of national resources and problem gambling, especially affecting vulnerable young men?
Thank you. I do support a Bill of Rights. I fiercely disagree with politicians, but you know, you can fiercely disagree and still love people. I love my brother. I don't know if he loves me, but
Peter,
I love my brother.
Former treasurer.
When we come to gambling, Erin, gambling in this country is what the NRA is in America, in terms of its dominance, its capture of regulators, of both sides of politics. This is extraordinary. We have the greatest gambling losses of any nation in the world, 40% higher than the nation that comes second. And why is it that way? Because we have 75% of all the world's pokies in pubs and clubs. 75%. Most pokies are in casinos, they're destination gambling, you plan to go there. When it comes to sports betting, it's the same story now. We have 743 ads on free-to-air TV each day, sports betting ads. Britain, UK has 11 a week. We have 743 a day. Italy, Spain have
I think it's
banned
one every
them.
2 minutes, I think, from what I understand.
Sorry?
One every 2 minutes, I think.
One every 2 minutes. We had the Sportsbet Brownlow, the Sportsbet Grand Final. It's why the AFL virtue signalling on the Andrew Thorburn one gets under my skin a bit, because they can do $4.5 billion for TV rights because they're going to sell far more sports bets, grooming our kids. So this last time I was on Q&A, I was on with a former Liberal senator, and I said we need a gambling royal commission. He threw up his arms. Tim always wants royal commissions. That's ridiculous. Nothing wrong with the industry. Well, we've now had royal commissions from Perth to Melbourne to Sydney to Queensland. What did we find? Into casinos, enabling organised crime, selling drugs and cleaning it to our kids. Will I get support? Only if people continue to speak up and say enough. Why should a 10-year-old now know the logo, jingle, odds of sports betting ads, which are an adult product? And they've never watched AFL, NRL without thinking it's associated with sports betting. So thank you for asking the question.
And I'm sure our politicians can take that one on notice. Let's finish tonight's discussion. Here's Pranit Anand.
Thank you. We are living in the lucky era. Some might say the smart era. For example, we are one of the most educated group of people, hyperconnectivity. We have never been in a better position for evidence-based decision-making, and yet exactly the opposite seems to be true. There is increasing rise of conspiracy theories and fake news. What's going on?
Erin Brockovich, Alex Jones today ordered to pay $1 billion US by saying the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax. What is going on?
Social media can be a real double-edged sword, if you will. And for me, I have conversations with my kids and friends, and they'll say something to me, and I'm like, where did you possibly hear that? Social media, Facebook, something on Twitter, and I'm like, you need to not. You can't believe everything you read anymore. You just can't. And I think at the individual level, it's incumbent upon you to have family conversations, to vet what it is you've read, and follow up and do your own research on the validity of that story or that information and whether it's true or not. And you have to be careful with social media. They just throw stuff out there just to get a reaction out of you. So again, for me, a lot of things is internally, whether I'm going to respond to it or not. I've learned that nothing changes till you change. So I make it my job, and I have a conversation with my family, my adult children, to make it their job to just not believe everything that's out there on social media. And if something strikes you and you just want to respond, think about it, ask some questions, have a conversation, and thoroughly vet what it is you think is going on.
Saba, there's more to it, isn't there, than this, though, of course. You're a journalist, and we see with people like Alex Jones, the followers that they can get. When he called Sandy Hook massacre a hoax, the number of his followers, the people who listened to his programs, increased. So how do we mediate? Where is fake news? What is real news? And why the attraction to these conspiracies?
I think the critical point is lack of diversity in the media. And usually white people write our story. This is and in the history of my work in Australia, in a very good faith, when I brought to attention of my editor that her white male journalist stolen my work, or they didn't pay me, or there was some lack of transparency around my byline and payment. They just changed the language. Before they were calling me extraordinary, just the star, and then the conversation completely after that, raising that concern, changed and reduced me, put question onto the quality of my work. And this kind of action, practice, push more people of color and people with the life experience in the background, because the media is using us only for case study. I realized that the media only wants me as a handbag to enhance the white journalist's work. They don't want my expertise, they don't value my life experiences. And the time that those journalists were training, I was spending in wandering and displacement. And I remember, for example, if I shift to refugee issues, their journalists ask me, can you get consent from this refugee? Can you just connect us with that refugee? And then, nothing. I was not owner of my own work. And I think this is our legitimate rights to progress, to develop. But there is a roof for democracy and freedom that does not allow us to break this glass ceiling to go above. And I think, Western feminists constantly talking about gender issue, but let's change the conversation from gender to gender racism. For example, let me to ask you how many women of color working in the leadership and management in ABC, in The Guardian, in SBS and elsewhere.
No, not enough is the answer, but you've been...
And about Iranian, for example, New York Times wrote that Iranian is just protesting for economic issues. In one of the reports, Guardian reported they are seeking for reforms, but they are not looking at the chant in the street. People say Khamenei is a murderer, his leadership is not illegitimate. People say this is not a protest, it is a revolution. We don't want Islamic Republic.
Well, Saba, your voice has certainly been...
And let me to tell this, one of the media outlets that I pitched to them, they said to me, I said, I was in these protests. I know how it looked like. I have been beaten. And they said, no, we covered sufficiently. And then when I get back to the coverage and I saw all white male, as always, they are defining how it looked like to be an Iranian woman live under Sharia law.
Saba, thank you. Your voice has certainly been heard this evening. That's all we have time for. Praneet, thank you for your question as well. Thanks to our panel, Perin Davey, Stephen Jones, Tim Costello, Saba Vasefi and Erin Brockovich. Thank you to those of you here and at home for driving the conversation. We're in Melbourne next week. Joining me to answer your questions there, Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen, economist Ross Garnaut and student activist Anjali Sharma, who's taken federal court action in the battle for a better future. Go to our website. You can register there to be in the audience and be part of that conversation as well. Thank you all again for tonight, and thanks to our panel. Good night.